The thing that works is to set the bar really low. One, start building, fundamental leg strength, core strength, so that you have the ability to handle the impact from running. Running is an impact sport. Stair climbing is one of the easiest ways to build strength. Climb about 500 steps at a time. The most important thing is just consistency. You can do simple things like doing wall sets, right? Doing squats, doing a plank, doing a dynamic plank, doing side planks. Right? All of these are like 1 minute, 2 minute exercises.
Running coach who has done 40 runs of marathon distance or over and coached over 1,000 people with 20 years of experience in running and coaching. Our guest today on the Settle or Be Better podcast is Mr. Dharmendra, who's going to be talking to us about running, training, and a lot more. So, welcome, Mr. Dharmendra, and over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your running story?
Thank you, Sakshi. Yeah, so I started running in the year 2001. That's about 22 years ago. I was at the IIM Lucknow campus, and I used to play a little bit of football. And uh, I started running in order to warm up to play football, and that eventually led me to run a bit more than I used to. So I used to run one loop of our campus, which is roughly about 2.8 kilometers. And one evening, I was chatting with my brother who used to be um, in a university in the US, and he was also running. So I told him what time I ran and for what distance. And those were the days when we didn't have, GPS watches. Um, at least I didn't have one. So I measured the distance of the loop using my motorbike's, speedometer. And I told him, look, I did this distance. And then he quickly asked me about something called the Cooper's test. He said, have you heard of this? I had no clue. And he told me to look it up. So I did. It turns out that if you can run 2,800 meters in 12 minutes, you're supposed to be at above average fitness. So the Cooper's test is actually a series of tests, but the cardio test is basically uh, a running test. Essentially, you have to run as hard as you can and try and cover more distance within 12 minutes. And it so happened that that day I had run, 12 minutes. That's what got the discussion started. And since that turned out to be above average, I got a little kicked with it. And I decided to start running, two loops under 24 minutes or in 24 minutes. Eventually, I got to about three loops in 36, but that was at the limit of my capabilities, and I never got further. I finished my PGDM from Lucknow in 2003, and I moved to the NCR. And 2004, the first edition of the Bombay Marathon happened. I saw outdoor hoarding for it, and I signed up for it, and I eventually went and ran it. I'd never run more than 8 kilometers, roughly more than 8 kilometers. And I ran a half marathon. I walked a bit, but it was so much fun that I decided that, next year I'll sign up for the full marathon. And I trained for that, unlike the half marathon. And that also, I managed to finish. I was quite surprised by both events. And because that turned out well, I started running a bit more and a bit more. Then, found fellow runners, found a community, and started training. Till 2011, running remained a hobby. But in the year 2011, I took a sabbatical from work because I wanted to raise the level of my running. So I took 5 months off work. I went to the US. I trained with a coach, and I dropped my marathon time to a Boston qualifying time. So I ran under 3 hours 10 minutes. And those 5 months of training, forget the outcome for a moment. Those 5 months were like the best time of my life till then. So I said, look, this is so much fun. I was a bachelor, I had no, major obligations. I had some money in the bank. So I said, look, I can do this job when I'm 40, but I'm not sure if I can do this kind of running so intense when I get older. So I spoke to my managers and I decided to take a break from work. Yeah, I quit my job, and they were very supportive. And the moment I quit my job, friends of mine who I used to run with, three of them said, "Why don't you do with us what you did with yourself, and we'll pay you for it." that set me off on coaching. Yeah, and barring 1 year in the last 12 years, I've never had to go look for a job. I've been coaching for a living for the last 12 years. I've also done some fair amount of consulting. I continue to do some consulting. Yeah, but coaching remains my primary source of income.
Amazing. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're in your 40s, right? Currently?
Yeah, I'm 45. Yeah,
Yeah, that's what sir told me, but I couldn't find a way to check it for myself exactly. But that's amazing because you're still doing it, and you're probably even defying your older records, or you're still becoming your fitter version. So that's really amazing to know that after all these years, you still continue to excel in it, right? And that's
yeah.
really an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I want to know, I want to begin by knowing why running. Like, what did it really do for you that made you go with it for all these years?
Yeah. So the thing that really worked for me and continues to work, right, 20 years later, it makes a huge difference to mental health for me. So I no longer run for physical health. There are several other things that you could do, which are almost equally fun and have the same effect on my body, right? Like I've tried cycling, I've tried lifting weights. It's fairly intense. I still swim occasionally, and I love it, right? But nothing, none of these three things that I've tried for more than 6 months at a time has had the effect that running continues to have on a daily basis. So that remains the single most important reason to continue running. Coaching is sort of related because uh, coaching is a source of livelihood, right? But it's like any other job, right? It just so happens that it's more fun than any other job I've done. But my own running is largely for mental health.
So, can we
And
say
by
that?
mental health, I mean, you
Yeah, yeah.
start your day with a run, right? It's very hard to get frustrated through the day, right? The levels of energy that you have on a day that you start with a run is like another world altogether.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And can we say by that that the runner's high is a real thing?
Yeah, I mean, see, it's not just runner's high, right? I also become a much calmer person. The runner's high is like a fleeting feeling, right? You get that when you run, say, slightly hard, right? Sometimes you get a runner's high, even if you run easy. But the difference to me in energy levels is essentially you seem to have a certain sense of calmness that is absent on days that I don't run. You just don't get the same thing.
Absolutely.
So you become more level-headed, kind of. You're more at peace with yourself, and it's largely like an internal locus of control, right? It really doesn't matter to me what other people are doing and what they get, and not just at running. The days I run, I seem to be a lot more self-focused than I'm on the other days.
Right. Of course. That makes a lot of sense. And if I'm being totally honest with you, I don't like running at all. Like, I haven't liked it ever since I was a child, probably because of the way we had to do it in school, for PE exams and all of that. So I've always been far away from it. I do train, strength train, and I do kickboxing, but I feel like after this episode, after talking to you and you explaining what it does for you, I might as well, go for it. And I hope that it does for our listeners as well. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, so see, the thing is, it may or may not work for you, right? A lot of people who have a history of having played sport, for example, they prefer to do shorter distances, more intense work. If that works for you, that's fine too. You don't have to run long distance.
True.
In my case, I'm not really, blessed or born with the kind of muscle mix that you need for doing really fast running or other ball sports, right? I don't have very good hand-eye coordination skills. Running is really easy, and when I say running, I mean largely long distance running. I run anywhere between 5 kilometers to like 100 plus kilometers. So uh, it doesn't really matter to me the pace at which I'm going. I run mostly easy these days. For the last 5 years or so, I haven't done much intense training. But like I said, the feeling that you get from being out for like even just a half an hour run is dramatic. I'm solidly addicted, and not because of runner's high. right? Because you get so much time with yourself, you also end up being more reflective as a person.
Absolutely, and that really does reflect through the way you talk about it and share your story. And running is like one of the easiest thing, like accessible thing. It doesn't cost anything, and it's the first thing that would come to anyone's mind almost if they think about like I'm gonna work on my health. I'm gonna exercise from tomorrow. Especially when it comes to New Year resolutions, like I'm gonna go for a run from January. But what happens is a lot of people do begin with it, and they probably go all in the beginning, right? Like say for a month as well, but they are just not able to sustain that practice. What advice would you have to such people, to make it more consistent in their life and not just every other month and then just stop midway?
Yeah. So the thing that I've observed most is, people start with everything from, getting into shape for their weddings, or, a relative's wedding or a friend's wedding and so on. All sorts of reasons, right? Or raising money for a charity and they're no shape to run, and they get into shape. The thing that works is to set the bar really low, right? People set sometimes what I think are, very artificial, limits. Like they think that they should be running for 5 kilometers at a time, or 15 minutes at a time. Actually, running for even a minute at a time is fine. It's really, the bar should be like really really low, right? If you can walk for about 15 minutes at one stretch, right, you should be able to run for about 5 minutes, anybody, more or less, right? Although running requires a different set of muscles, if you're in otherwise good health, uh, you can run for about 5 minutes. Most of us can. What people who give up easily, after trying it for a bit, get wrong is they try and go too fast. So mostly going too fast and too soon, right? Like I said, they set expectations saying that they need to run for like half an hour or an hour. That's too much, right? Um, the average age of the person that I coach, right, is usually in the early 30s, right? So most people actually take to it pretty late in life. If you haven't done any sport before and if you're overweight, then you must take it really easy, right? You should focus on the fundamentals. Uh, so one reason to give up is you're going too long and too fast, right? So set very low expectations. Go out for just 10 minutes, right? Walk 10 minutes, run 5 minutes, walk another 10 minutes, and then gradually add a minute of running every alternate day or something, right? Don't run every day. That's one way to kind of keep your motivation going, right? If you don't run for a day, you feel a little itchy, and next day you want to go running, right? If you run every day, it becomes too commonplace. You might give up. The other thing is most people don't do strength training, right? So, and some people have lots of bias against going to gym, and so on. An easy way to kind of get around it is, do what is accessible, what's in your environment, right? Nowadays reasonably well known that you design your environment to make sure your habits fall in place, right? So one way to do that, for example, if you live in an apartment, is to just climb stairs, right? Stair climbing is one of the easiest ways to build strength. Yeah, climb about 500 steps at a time, and that gets you like strong enough to be able to run for about 2 to 3 minutes at a time. And there's really nothing humiliating about walking. Walking is equally intense, right? It's a low intensity activity, but it's something that you can do for like a few hours at a time, right? All people who go for treks and all sometimes are in excellent shape, right? Because they do it so regularly. So one, start building fundamental leg strength, core strength, so that you have the ability to handle the impact from running. Running is an impact sport. So people don't realize, after some time their lower back begins to hurt, or their knees begin to hurt, or hips begin to hurt. All of this just comes from not attending to the required strength training. So do strength training. Like I said, if you don't like going to the gym, start doing squats at home, right? Or start doing stair climbing, or still, just do simple step ups, right? Climb like a 6-inch step, just get down, right? You just need one step. You can do that 500 times, right? If you can do 500 step ups, you're at a different level of cardio. Like I said, if you raise the bar too high, then you're bound to disappoint yourself. So easy to just set low expectations and beat them, and then raise the bar. Right? Do that very gradually. The cool thing is running is that way. I mean, running long distance, like sort of analogous to how life should be, right? You keep raising the bar, but do it very gradually. The most important thing is just consistency. Most people forget that being consistent sometimes, or most of the times actually trumps being very intense, right? It's better that you do say 250 days of running in a year, even if it's 15 to 20 minutes, rather than do 100 days of super intense work and then do nothing with the other 250 days. So if you set yourself like a reasonably long, medium to long term kind of milestone and take it really easy, you should be able to do it for a while.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, the things that you just added, that was my next question. That what should we, how should we train? What sort of things should we train for that would complement our running? And you really simplified it, because not everyone would be like, I'll be running and I'll also be strength training. I'll do all of these other things also to complement my running. But you really simplified it, and
Yeah.
it's something that anyone can do anywhere in their building, at their home, with a stepper. So that's really there's some great insights. And also what you said earlier, it really reminded me of I think something that I read in Atomic Habits is what happens is, like you said, when people go all in the beginning and they set the bar too high, and it's when we start liking this habit that we are building, say for 2 to 3 days, and we really want to do it more, and we end up doing it more every single day, and after a few weeks we just lose it, right? So when you really like something and you're building this habit, it's better to just stop at that one point where you're really loving it and continuing it along the way, right? Because otherwise we always tend to go all in with all our efforts and setting the bar too high, and end up stopping that for some reason, and probably even circling back and going through the same cycle. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that with us. And what are your tips for beginners who want to train for long distance running? Like, say a week of training, what would it look like? Like, what would they be doing for a week, if, I mean, consecutively for more weeks as well, to sort of like plan
Hmm.
the way that they train for a marathon or something else?
Yeah. So if you've like never run before, the first thing you should do is, start by about, like I said, 10, 15 minutes of running a day. Uh, Figure out, I think 3 days of running should do in the beginning. Don't set any distance goals. Just set sort of time on your feet kind of goal. So that should be about, say, 10, 15 minutes, right? Like walk for 5 minutes, run for 5 minutes, or, maybe run for 1 minute, walk for 1 minute, and do that, like, say, 10 times, right? So you get 10 minutes of walking, 10 minutes of running. Do that every alternate day. Eventually, you should be able to get to a stage where you can do that for about, say, 5 minutes running, 5 minutes walk, right? So if you can do 3 sets of that, excellent, right? You're already should be able to do about half a kilometer at a time running. So once you're able to do 3 days of running, uh, regardless of age, more or less everybody should do at least 2 days of strength training, right? And by strength training, I don't mean going to a gym. Strength training means just doing some resistance training that builds the basic muscles, right? Strengthen your leg muscles, strengthen your hip and glutes, right? Your core. So what do you do for that? Lots of things you can do at home. You don't need to go to a gym. It would be nice to have resistance bands because that adds a little more variety and gives you more options. But even if you don't have them, you can do simple things like doing wall sets, right? Doing squats, doing a plank, doing a dynamic plank, doing side planks, right? All of these are like 1 minute, 2 minute exercises. But you can circle through them, right? Do like 3, 4 sets of these, each about 30 seconds long. You already, suddenly you have like a 10, 15 minute routine, right? Do this, you can do every day, right? If it's this simple. If it's very intense, like if you're doing like say 500 squats or 200 sit-ups or something, that's probably something you should do 2 days a week. But if you're doing something very simple to just get started, like I said, even strength training, it's like running, right? You set the bar really low. Do something that you can hold on for, say, 100-day horizon, right? So do some simple strength training at least 2 days a week, right? Once you get that, then my suggestion is, there's a lot of good information available on the net. Look up what a typical training plan for like a 5K will look like, right? If you want to run a 5 kilometer race, right? Walk that 5 kilometers once and see how it feels, right? Then do 1 kilometer walk, 1 kilometer run. So you've done either 3 kilometers walk, 2 kilometers run, or the other way around. You'll know what it feels like. Try and improve the amount of distance that you can run for. So, I mean, you said only 1 week, right? So, a typical week should be like at least one day of pure rest, where you do nothing and just lounge about. some core exercises, but some leg and core exercises at least 2 days a week where you spend about half an hour strengthening basic muscles. Make sure you stretch after your run. Do some activation drills before you run. That's about it. Yeah, very simple, but sort of a schedule you can stick to for a week. And don't raise the distance or the speed for at least a couple of weeks, right? You should become super comfortable at the level you're at before you add even like 10% more. And then you can add, 5%, 10%, recover every 3 weeks or so, right? Do less distance, less intensity every 3 weeks for a week, and then pick up again.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense, and it really does simplify it when someone says that I'm going to train for a marathon, because it seems like this big thing that it's going to happen, and now I have to do all the things in the world to train for it. But that really does simplify it, and I'm sure it's a lot more doable to sustain this habit in the long run as well. So thank you for sharing those tips with us. And moving on to tracking progress as a runner. Uh, like any other sport or even strength training, at some point, someone who has been consistent, say probably for a year or two also, and who has been doing this, but at some point they would hit a plateau and they'll be like, where am I going from this? Like, what is the next step? Like, how do I progress from this? Is this all that my body can do? What would you sort of suggest at that point to track the progress and to stack the results on that at that point when they hit the plateau?
Yeah. So the thing is, what most people don't focus on when they train for any sport, including running, is that they think that spending more time running will improve your running, right? Actually, it's the time that you spend outside of running, right? So even if you're playing badminton, right, you want to play at what maximum 2-3 hours a day, right? Even at the elite level, you probably pay 5-6 hours a day, right? But uh, I'm guessing you probably pay much less, but I'm saying what do you do for the other, say, 10 hours that you're active? So, which means you need to focus on those things, right? You need to focus on strength training, you need to sleep well, and you need to eat well, right? I keep telling the people I coach as well as, prospective training, right? I say that, look, nothing that you will do will move the needle as, having the right amount of muscle, right? Which means, focus on lowering your body fat. Like, there's no ideal number, but see, men are supposed to have, say, between say 15 and 20%, right? And 20% is the higher end, right? So maybe 18%. If you get your body fat closer to 15%, you're going to be, reasonably strong as a person, assuming you're doing strength training, right? Similarly, for women, I think the range is something like 18 to 24, right? So if you're at, say, 30% body fat, get your body fat down to 25, right? Even at the higher end, if you get your body fat down to 25, uh, you're simply having to carry less weight when you run, right? And that's mostly food, right? There's some muscle work involved, and there's proper eating, right? You're going to spend almost as much time eating as you're going to spend running, right? And people just focus on the running. So work on eating well, sleeping well, doing strength training, and then focus on the training, right? Most people focus on just the training. That's not okay. Yeah, so get advice, right? See, there are even Olympians who manage on their own, and there are amateurs who hire coaches. It depends on largely what kind of person you are, right? If you're coachable and if you think somebody else should manage it for you, by all means, find a coach. But you can do reasonably well without a coach too. It depends on where you are and what kind of person you are. Sometimes the same person who's not looking for a coach at this point in time might want to look for a coach 5 years down the line. So it's very,
Right.
very context dependent.
Absolutely. And like a lot of people who do a run or go for marathons, it's usually just a hobby. But for a lot of other people, it's really a way to feel accomplished, right? Like, I mean, in the daily routine, if we have like a 9 to 5 job or we're busy with all of these responsibilities, there need to be something in our life that gives us a sense of accomplishment, and it really does a lot for us that a lot of us don't realize when we achieve even the little progress, like even just like a 10 seconds 20-second progress in our training or the way we run, right? And as important as it is to like train our body, do all of these exercises and plan our trainings, it's as important to do work on our mind, right? Like on a mindset. And I want to know that when you are about to go for a marathon, or even if any of your clients are about to, what is it that, what's the self dialogue that's going on, and what is it that you're telling yourself just before, like a few minutes before the marathon, and probably
Right.
towards the end
So,
as well, because I'm sure that the end is as difficult as it gets, right? So
yeah. So I had one of my trainees spend a lot of time with me asking this question years ago, right? He was an Indian. He was Italian. So he always asked, what are you thinking about? It so happened that usually when I'm running, my mind is very empty, right? Like completely empty, right? I have lots of thoughts come and go, but it's a bit like, meditation is supposed to be, right? Um, I'm at my best behavior when I'm running, right? Like completely at peace with myself. So my mind is empty. Um, there have been times when it hasn't been all calm, right? I'm trying to chase a certain time, so I'm very fussed about that. Getting into the right position, making sure the first kilometer is not very hard or very fast, and so on. But usually, because it's a long distance, I coach mostly for people running at least 5 kilometers or more, right? So the moment you're looking at something like that, there is enough research to show that the world records, most of the world records between a 5K and a marathon are all set by people running like an even pace, right? Or a negative split, right? Which means you get faster towards the end, right? In the second half. That takes significant amount of confidence and trust in your training. So one, you need to have done the training, and two, you need to trust either in your judgment or in a coach judgment that if you run to a certain plan, mostly things should go right. Right? There are obviously enough things which are out of your control, like weather is not in your control. Right? It might get really sunny or humid, but barring such things, if you reasonably stick to an even split, something that's in your ballpark, you should be able to produce your best performance. And holding back for about 60-70% of the distance of a race, even if it's a 10K, takes a lot of self control, right? So it's mostly not allowing yourself to get carried away. Some people do it consciously, some people do it, unconsciously. So it depends, like I said, on the kind of person you are. So mostly it is, training yourself to not get carried away, right? Not getting impatient. Some people are naturally patient. I am not one of those, but it has to be trained. But at running, I tend to have reasonable amount of patience. After having run, so many thousand kilometers, I can reasonably, within my ballpark, I can get a kilometer right down to like a couple of seconds of the splits, right? Unless it gets very hard. So in which case, I don't need to look at my watch. I can tell, I'm running 5 minutes, 15 seconds a kilometer, or 5 minutes, 25 seconds a kilometer. You can tell by just how you're running. So then you don't need to look at the watch. So all you're doing is going, taking it really 1 kilometer at a time. Sometimes, if the environment is not so favorable, then it's just 100 meters at a time, right? I've gone through like an entire marathon, taking it about 100 meters at a time after about 25, 26 kilometers because it's lousy weather. In which case, you're just trying to hang on. The cool thing is in mass participation events is that you always have company, right?
true.
They might not be running alongside. We'll have people ahead of you. We'll have people behind you. And almost if you are suffering, then it's very likely that people around you are also suffering, right? So it's sort of like life, right? You know that you're not going to be alone, and it's a very human thing to kind of feel better when you're not the only one suffering, right? Sometimes you might be the only one suffering, but otherwise, in a race, you have a lot of emotions, go through your head. There might be elation, there might be disappointment, and so on. But essentially, it's like, a dialogue with yourself. One way to handle it is to, let thoughts come and go, like the standard advice for meditation, right? That you don't try to control your thoughts. You
Right.
just acknowledge that things are, coming and let them go, right? Don't hang on to anything. The other thing is, try and think of as few things as possible, right? Be very focused. Like if you've seen elite athletes in races, right? You have, unless they tell you, you have no idea what's going through their heads, right? But they also work very hard on mental training, right? Trying to keep themselves calm and super focused, right? For example, if you drop a water bottle, right? What do you do? Right. For amateur athletes, it doesn't really matter. You'll find 1-2 kilometers down the line. But for an elite athlete, in 2 kilometers, you can really, it can make or break your race. But they trained right? They have such adverse events in practice to make sure that they know how they'll deal with it as they go. So, like I said, so you trust in your training, which means you have to do the training. You can't walk into a race without training and expect it to go well too. It might go well, but it's usually a surprise if it goes well without training, right? Most of the times, a lot of things that you haven't planned for. That's the point of training. Yeah. So otherwise, I don't try and think too much, try and take in the landscape. There have been races where I've been super focused on the time, in which case, just do what we call a body check, right? You check how your breathing is, you figure out if you're landing hard, if you're landing soft, right? Are you swinging your arms?
Right.
Is your left leg, right leg both working in the same way? Things like that. But otherwise, very simple. Like in my case, I just look at the kilometer ahead and, distract myself. Sometimes I sing. I have a lot of music that runs through my head. I don't listen to music, but there's stuff in my head. Sometimes I like to take, issues that I have that I would like to solve or explore and think about it. And a lot of times, especially when I used to be in consulting full time, now I do just some part time consulting. When I used to be in consulting, I used to take problems that I could think about. If you have a presentation on that day, right, sit and think about it. So I find a lot of things to kind of dwell on, and usually it's over before you kind of know it. Only when it's really longer than say 3 hours, then you run out of things, then you again become very calm. So it's like cyclical.
Absolutely. These are some great insights. And I want to know if you have ever done this or any of your athletes that you train have done this. Like, does walking the track before or just, going through the track that you're going to run next week help in any way? Like, do you ever like go and just like, visualize that at this point, I want myself to think this way or I want myself to, perform in this way when I'm at this point at the track? Does it ever help to put yourself in the situation before it happens and put an intention to it?
Yeah, so I've tried both sorts of things. I've kind of scoped out a race the day before or a couple of days before. But I've also walked into a race completely blind where I didn't know what any kilometer looked like. Uh, Partly because it depends on the state of mind I'm in. When I want to be super focused, don't want too many variables, then I probably want to go out and scope. But when I want some source of distraction, right, like then every kilometer is new. Right? The novelty value is really high. Then I don't have that much anxiety over all of this. So visualization is largely helpful when you have a certain time target, right? I used to run such races, but at least in the last 5 years or so, it's not such a big deal. I have very young kids, right? So I've gone into races where I've absolutely no clue, right? For example, I did a race earlier this year in March, uh, where I did a 12-hour run. It's the longest I've run at one shot, right? And I never run either 100 kilometers or over, say, 10 hours, right? The previous longest I'd run for a little over 9.5 hours. So one thing was, I should probably go and run on a track for a few hours just to see how it is, right? The other thing was to say, look, it's going to be super boring, but as well make the boredom happen just on that one day, right? Or rather night. I ran through the night actually. I chose the night slot. So I didn't run on a track even once, right? But I ran on it for the remaining, whatever, 11 hours, 12 hours. The idea was that the very fact that it's so novel will keep me engaged, so I won't get bored. So I had so many things that I had worried about, including having food in the night, which most of us are not used to, right? Like who eats food at 3 in the morning, usually, right? Unless you have a night shift or something. But all of that happened. I was worried about a bunch of things, going to loo during the run, things like that. None of that was like an issue, right? I was worried whether I'd have enough sugar, blood sugar for the run. It's a complete non-issue on the run, right? On that day, I had like just watermelon and water for like 6 hours, right? No other source of food, no gels, nothing. So sometimes, the things that you worry about turn out to be complete non-issues. So, like I said, and that day I was only focused on hitting 100K in 12 hours. That was the only goal.
Right.
So, until about half an hour before that thing ended, I was on the verge of it. I was at about 99, and my plan was to run 4 kilometers in remaining half an hour. But then somebody pointed out that if I could hit a little over four, I would be on the podium. So then I started running really hard. So suddenly, it was like an unexpected source of motivation. But I ran my fastest 5 kilometers towards the end,
Wow.
mostly because I had zero expectation. My only plan was I'm going to hit 100K and then I'm going to go home, right? But because somebody pointed out, I said, okay, it might as well hang around for another half an hour because there's time left. So it's like that. Because I had no expectations, it turned out that I could handle it really well. But I've been in races like I've done exactly what you said. I knew the elevation of every kilometer. I knew where to stop, where I would have water, where I would eat gel, and so on. But off late, I haven't had any such races where I'm focused on time. So I've had time to really treat almost every kilometer like a surprise.
Wow, that's a great tip to think about. And was this a very recent one that you ran?
Yeah, so this was in March, so 6 months ago. It
Right.
was the stadium run. There's a stadium run. They have the 24-hour championships to select the Indian team in Bangalore.
Mhm.
It's run on a 400-meter track. So I ran in the 12-hour event in that. So it was great fun. It's
Wow,
one of the best things I've done.
that's amazing. And to see a 45-year-old runner do this for 12 hours, I mean, me in my 20s would also, like, I don't know if I would ever do it, right? Like, and of course, you have years of training, but did you ever even imagine that you would be doing this at 45 when you were in your early days of training? Or did you sort of think that, with age, you would sort of slow down a little bit?
Yeah, so when I was younger, I was mostly focused on the marathon distance, right? And I wanted to run my age group norm, right? Whatever is for Boston. But once that happened, since then my focus has only been to, kind of run this. I always wanted to run a little bit longer. Like I still have a list of races I want to run, which are all longer than a marathon. But none of them are, track races, right?
Right.
I've run a trail race in the coffee estates of Chikmagalur. It's called the Malnad Ultra. It's one of the most beautiful races I've run in my life, right? So when I train for that race, it's not boring for a moment, right? Because hardly anything is repetitive. It's all coffee estate. It's borders on a jungle. Uh, you're mostly alone for most of the race. Yeah, I mean, you will run into other participants at points in time. You meet them at water stops or lunch or something. But it's like a vacation with yourself on steroids, right? Because it's pure nature, it's great weather, and it's very challenging as a race. So finishing a certain time wasn't the goal. Finishing the race was the goal. I had a splendid time, running that entire race, and I ran all of it alone. This was about 6 years ago. I haven't, managed to go back because it requires a lot of training, right, to get into shape to run a fairly challenging terrain. So most of it is dirt. It's on, coffee estate, what we call jeep roads. So it's not easy. So running 80 kilometers at one shot is very doable, but doing it on that terrain with that kind of elevation drop is significantly hard. I am also the sort of person who doesn't like to just dabble. I want to go and have lots of fun doing it, and lots of fun means doing it with some level of performance. It should feel really hard and memorable, which means you have to train. So I trained for about 4 5 months to get to the race, and it turned out to be very very rewarding because of that. Right?
Absolutely. That it's been really amazing to have this conversation with you, and I hope that it really encourages our listeners to also, if they haven't done yet, they haven't like run yet, like they should go and train for it and give it a try for themselves. And as we conclude the episode today, do you have any last messages or thoughts to leave us with?
Yeah, it's almost the same as what you asked me about. What's the advice for beginners, right? Is don't be in a hurry, right? If you're aiming for long distance running, it's something you want to do. Don't be in a hurry, right? And don't use somebody else's achievements as your benchmarks, right? Just because somebody has managed to run, say, 10K in 45 minutes doesn't mean that you can also or should also go and try and do it, because you might know a lot of things about one person's life, but long distance running, at least for amateurs, right, there's significant amount of mental strength required, right? We don't know what's going through your head, right? In fact, we don't even know what's going through the minds of elite athletes too, right? Unless they tell you. But you assume that, since they're in it for a livelihood, they're going to be setting aside a few things or they're able to manage, right? Because that's what they do for a living. But in our case, your life doesn't depend on it, right? You're doing it largely for, personal health, general entertainment, right? In which case, you might as well enjoy. And races are like outcomes, right? You shouldn't really worry so much about races. You should focus on the process because most of the time you're spending is in training, right? In which case you might as well do that part well. Because
Right.
even if you don't go do the race, you'll have the memories of having trained together for 6 months, and that's not going to disappear in a hurry, right? Yeah. So set basically, you're a case of one. So use yourself as a benchmark. You should be better than yourself for a reasonable amount of time. You should be able to match or beat yourself from a while ago. Right? At some point in time, performance begins to drop. Then you adjust for age and see, am I still as good at 50 as I was at 40? Adjusting for age. There are calculators available to tell you what's a good time. If you run, say, 50 minutes for a 10K at age 40, what is the equivalent at age 50? Right? As long as you can, kind of beat that norm or match that norm, then you're like, okay. People get too carried away with what other people are doing, right?
True.
Running should be like a good way to encourage you to just think of yourself and work on yourself, right? And if possible, if you're the benevolent sort, then you should help other people do their own training, get better, give them company and this. But that's like a bonus. The minimum you should do is focus on yourself, right? As
Absolutely.
in, don't let what other people are doing to distract you from improving yourself, right? It should just be an avenue to improve yourself.
Absolutely. That's been really amazing. It's a very powerful message, and I hope our listeners are really encouraged to go and do this for themselves. Thank you so much, Mr. Dharmendra, once again for being here. And for the listeners who'd like to reach out to you, probably get an opportunity to train with you, the details would be in the description below. They can reach out, they can ask you questions, and probably even train with you someday. Thank you once again for being here on our
Yeah,
podcast today.
yeah. Thank you, Sakshi. Thank you. Have a good day.
That's it for today's episode. I am Sakshi Pawar, and I'll be your host for the Settle or Be Better podcast. So stay tuned while we bring more inspiring stories. You know the drill. Subscribe to the Settle or Be Better podcast, like, share, and comment on our videos, and oh, hit the bell icon because you don't want to miss the mind boggling health discussions we're about to bring for you. Why settle when you can be better?